Hi. So I wanted to put this video together for like the last, I don't know, 3 years at least. And my kids were always like, no, don't do it. It's super embarrassing and it's not going to be good. And I'm to the point in my life where I don't care if it's good. I need to preserve this for my family's history. So, I also was thinking, because there's an economic downturn right now with inflation and housing prices becoming unaffordable for a lot of people, that now would be a good time to put some of my ideas out there. So I want to say that I am a first generation American born Donauschwab German. That means that my parents immigrated after World War II in the 1950s. They were born in Croatia. A lot of Donauschwaben were born in what were the Eastern Bloc countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, which is now Croatia and Serbia. My parents were from Croatia, but my grandparent on my father's side was born in Serbia. Donauschwaben were what the Nazis referred to as Volksdeutsch, and they used that as a means to justify invading those countries. And then as the war was coming to an end and the communist regimes were set up, they used that justification to expel all the Germans. And so they became refugees. They lived in Austria, my parents and on both sides. Some resettled in Germany. My family stayed in Austria until they were sponsored to come to the United States. So a lot of my family history growing up was listening to stories about the old country, and they were referring to Croatia, because they were subsistence farmers. They grew everything they needed and had a little bit left over to go to town to buy salt and finer fabrics and things like that, so that but for the most part they had their own fowls, so they could eat and make feather beds or whatever. They had sheep so that they could make wool. They spun the wool. It was, in a lot of ways, growing up here in America, it seemed to me very Amish, but without the Protestantism. And that's actually quite true, because my understanding is that the migrations away from Germany happened probably about the same time. So growing up, my parents had been exposed to extreme poverty, and even my grandma had malnutrition when she was pregnant with my uncle. So I was taught the old ways from the old country, but also how to survive, and to take pride in the fact that the ingenuity and the thrift of the Donauschwaben people is what helped them become resilient and succeed once they came to America. In America, a lot of people moved to the urban centers to work in factories, because it was the 50s and America was kind of thriving, and you didn't need to be literate, and which they were not, and you didn't have to even speak English. So I don't know much about the other cities in America where the Donauschwaben settled, but I know that a lot of them were in Chicago, and there was a German neighborhood in Chicago, which was Lincoln Park now. It was very there was a German church, and there were German stores, and so consequently my parents learned English a little bit. My father more so because of work, but my mother was not very fluent in English while she lived in Chicago. She was a cleaning lady. A lot of the ladies became cleaning ladies if they didn't work in a factory. And then the men, some of them, most of them, went into the trades. And at the time, unions were, a thing. In the 60s, later in the 60s and 70s, they were still a thing, and you could get lucrative work supporting a family, and the moms would either stay home or, you know, have little jobs here and there. And so the reason why I wanted to talk about this now is that my parents' generation has all but died off. And I grew up with parents who were older. So even in the 70s when I was being raised, my lifestyle was more old-fashioned. So I grew up, English was my second language, but you know, I learned a lot of English from the kids in the neighborhood and from television. My mom only started really speaking better English once us kids were in school. So the language that I learned has now basically died off because the Germans, the native Donauschwaben speakers weren't living there anymore, and they assimilated into Germany, Austria, or English-speaking countries. And the kids of my generation generally were taught Hochdeutsch. But I grew up around a bunch of elderly people in my community. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago where there were a lot of retired Donauschwaben who were able to afford little houses, and then they had big gardens and big yards. And so I grew up around a bunch of people speaking Schwabish, and they were, you know, so I'm like a native Schwabish speaker. Even when I try to speak Hochdeutsch, you know, the Schwabish comes through because I roll my R's, or, you know, I don't say nein as much as I say net. And anyway, so there's an element of language death going on, but there's also cultural dying because America is changing, and we've gotten to that generation where there's so much assimilation. But there are so many things that I feel are helpful that I want to make a record of them. Even if the culture itself doesn't persist, there are certain values and certain tricks that I want to maintain for the record for my children and possible grandchildren, and you know, and anybody else who can get use of that. So there will be further videos, hopefully, and that's where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.